Hello, my History 115 students. This is your Professor Donald Earl Collins talking to you today about weeks 4 and 5 of the course. Normally, this would just be a video about the lecture notes and the themes for weeks 4 and 5. But given the fact that your paper assignment deals with these same themes, this is a twofer. So this will be a combination of me explaining the main themes for weeks 4 and 5 in terms of the readings, the lectures, the discussions, etc. for the course as a whole, and also talking about your paper assignment and my expectations thereof in terms of both content, the questions, the standard do's and don'ts that I normally go through with any course. You will get citations and references at a later date, probably at the end of this week or the beginning of week 5. So let's start. The main theme for weeks 4 and 5, is really around the differences between the main classical civilizations of this period between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE, or for those of you who don't care about these designations, 500 BC and 500 AD. Give or take about 150 years. Why give or take 150 years? Because if you're only thinking about Europe in terms of classical civilizations, then yeah, you're talking roughly between 500 BCE and 500 CE. But if you also include Persia and China and India, then it's more like 650 BCE to 650 or so AD or CE. All right, so that's one thing to get clear. So really around this period, the main theme is the rise of major ancient empires. Relatively speaking, they're not as ancient as the early civilizations, of course, but they're not exactly 21st century countries or nation states either. So that's a big thing. But what you ought to realize within that theme is the fact that this is an evolution. You don't all of a sudden have large empires around 300 BCE or 200 BCE, or around the birth of Jesus, in terms of the Roman Empire. That's an evolutionary process. You don't move simply from major cities becoming city-states and then kingdoms in the cases of Egypt or Samaria or even Harappa, India, and then all of a sudden end up with empires. There are barriers, if you will, that people have to cross. There are changes that have to happen and evolutions that have to happen in people's thinking around power, around control, around centralization, around militaries, etc., to make all of that happen so that you end up with classical civilizations by around 500 BCE. The main thing to realize, and I'll use Egypt as an example, is the fact that it is evolutionary. Early Kingdom Egypt is not the same as New Kingdom Egypt or Imperial Egypt. One's a kingdom made up of city-states in Early Kingdom Egypt or Old Kingdom Egypt, and the other one is a full-fledged regional empire. Egypt might basically cover the Nile River Valley from basically northern Sudan all the way to the Mediterranean coast, and maybe areas on the west and east banks of both during the Old Kingdom period. Egypt, by the time you get to the New Kingdom period, at its height, roughly around 1300, 1200 BCE, is a regional empire that includes parts of what we would call the Sinai Peninsula, parts of southern Palestine, southern Jordan, maybe even parts of what we would now call Saudi Arabia. Right? So they're along the Red Sea, they're along the Mediterranean coast, they're clashing with another regional empire to its north, which happens to be the Hittites of Turkey and Syria and Lebanon. They control that region. They're not big in the sense that we would think of major world empires, but they're not small like city-states that have come together to form a kingdom either. There's centralization of power. There's more authority. The militaries are larger. Think about the clash. There's a key battle that takes place between the Hittites and the Egyptians around 1250 BCE, in which something like 30,000 men in chariots and on foot come together in battle and fight to a stalemate. And they even write about it's one of the first recorded battles from start to finish in all of world history. And in fact, in talking about those battles, you get a lot of details about the level of technology and the technological differences and being able to cover these distances. And without the domestication of the horse to the point where it could pull a wheeled troop carrier for people who are expert at shooting bows and arrows in the form of chariots, you can't fight this battle. It's not groups of men just running across deserts and across flat lands, flat grasslands in order to fight each other. They need these technologies in order to move people. And so those are key developments. And if you look further and you look at the ancient Greeks, you look at the Romans, you look at the Persians, you see some of those developments in terms of technology and the use of the horse, in terms of developing better killing methods and killing machines, better bows and arrows, composite arrows even. The development of the saddle, so you don't even need a chariot to move troops. You can actually develop what we now call cavalry, things like that. So just from a militaristic military standpoint, you see the development and evolution that allows these small kingdoms or city-states to gradually become imperialistic and become empires in the process of development of classical civilizations. But you also need large populations to do this as well. Excuse me. Even populations that Egypt was able to sustain in the early kingdom period of, say, 4 or 5 million people would be tiny compared to the populations of these empires by the time you get to the classical period. Whether you're talking about Persia under the Achaemenids, or you're talking about ancient Greece during its Hellenistic period, from Alexander the Great to the Ptolemies in Egypt and so on, or whether you're talking about the Roman Empire or later on the Han Dynasty, or you're talking about Kushan India around the time of 150 CE, those empires all include tens of millions of people in the neighborhood of anywhere between 20 million and 60 million people at their height, each. All right, so those are huge numbers by comparison, and they're covering huge swaths of territory. The Roman Empire at its height had more than 2 million square miles within its borders. The Persian Empire at its height had more than 2 million square miles within its borders. Alexander the Great's empire at its height, because it broke up pretty soon after his death, was about 2.5 million square miles. Han Dynasty, China controlled about 2/3 of what we would consider modern China, plus areas that include parts of Korea, parts of Mongolia, parts of Vietnam, etc. So that's about 2 million square miles. Why roughly 2 million square miles? Because that's pretty much the limit of any kingdom in terms of both its population, resources, military resources, the ability to ride a horse for a certain distance, etc., over that course of time. Once you get past that, you reach into territories that might be too hard for any one empire, any one centralized government to control. It's just that simple. Also, because at a certain point you end up bumping up against another civilization that might be powerful enough to stop you from moving forward. For the Romans, it happened to be barbarians to the north who were not just simply a bunch of crazy people running around trying to slaughter people. If that were the case, the Romans could have easily conquered them. But they had their own civilization, their own ways of doing things, ways of growing food, own language, own religions, etc., etc., etc. So they bumped up against them. Same thing with the Chinese, the Han Chinese, when it came to Mongolia and the areas to its north. Ancient Mongolians at that time period were their barbarians, were those folks with their own culture, own religion, own ways of fighting, and quite frankly, ways of fighting that enabled them at times to subdue Han China. So you have to keep that in mind. They're bumping up against other people. They're bumping up against other civilizations. Maybe they don't have major cities the way that Rome has Rome and other cities with at least 200,000 people. Rome itself was over 1 million. Maybe it's not in the same sense that Han China, with all of its cities of 250,000 and 500,000 people, or Greece or any of these other major empires, but they're civilizations nevertheless. So those are the themes that, in terms of the rise of empires, the rise of governmental structures, the rise of the ability to incorporate and stitch together huge swaths of people over a certain territory. And because these empires end up bumping up against each other, you also get trade. You get really as close to what we would understand as global trade as possible, beginning in the classical period. The rise of the Silk Road, which isn't just a road, it's a combination of roadways and waterways. Some paved in the case of Rome and Persia and Greece, some not paved in terms of Central Asia, that allows folks from the East to trade with folks from the West and vice versa. In other words, silk from China can somehow make its way through India all the way to Rome, and Roman products can make their way from Rome all the way to India and somehow end up, you can even find gold coins in the Roman period, from the Roman imperial period, in places like Han China in this period. It's not that Han Chinese and Roman officials actually meet at any point, but there's trade going on through India, through Central Asia, through the Indian Ocean, through the Red Sea, across the Hindu Kush, that enables all of these groups of people to trade with each other. The Romans to get luxury goods for their 2 to 5% of the population that actually can afford them. And Chinese, the same thing. So you have this limited interregional Eurasian / Northern African, somewhat Sahelian trade going across this large swath of the planet, which is good in terms of cultural exchange of religions and ideas, but can also potentially be bad in terms of diseases and barbarians and having to fight off all other cultures all the same. So there's a downside to it just as much as there's a good side to it. And that's the key to really understanding the classical period, why these empires rise, why they decline, and why they actually, in the case of Rome, certainly the western part of the Roman Empire, by the time you get to the 4th and 5th centuries CE, falls apart completely, right? So there's all of that mixed in with understanding this week. So please read your lecture notes. Please read the quick history facts. It's a lot of data, but it's not as much data as you've had to deal with the first 3 weeks, where you're covering literally thousands and thousands of years of history and trying to understand cultures on a global scale. This is narrower. We're trying to understand more deeply classical civilizations across a 1,000 to roughly 1,300 year period. And there are only 5 of them really that you really have to understand. So keep that in mind. As far as your paper is concerned, I'm going to go over 2 things around your paper. Content, I'm repeating myself, content, and really what I'm looking for in terms of expectations. Here's the question. I'm just going to read it so that you understand it. I understand there's more than one question mark in here, so it's a multi-part question. Which one was more important in the decline or collapse of classical civilizations between 150 CE and 600 CE? Barbarian invasions, civil war, or epidemic diseases? Why the one you picked? Please use at least 2 examples from various classical civilizations across Eurasia for the time period in answering this question. Please also address within your answer the differences between a decline in a civilization and a collapse of one. This is as straightforward as I can get. But let me break it down for you. You're looking at a 450-year period. Why did I pick 150 CE and 600 CE? Because that 150 CE is pretty much the height of the Silk Road trade in the classical period. After this period, you start to see signs of decay and decline across all of the classical civilizations in this period. Greco-Roman, Persian, Indian, Chinese. All 4 or 5 of those, because Greco-Romans is essentially 2, experience some sort of decline between 150 and 600 CE. The decline might not be steep. It might be a partial collapse. It might be a complete collapse, but somewhere in between. And barbarian invasions are involved. Civil war is often involved. Epidemic disease is often involved. Sometimes it's a combination of all of those. I'm asking you, generally speaking, to pick one. However, if you decide that you want to go ahead and say that they're all more or less combined in sort of a progression to lead to a collapse or decline of civilization, be my guest. It's a harder argument to make because you have to understand the connections between civil war and invasions and epidemic disease, and how all of those conspire to bring down the Western Roman Empire, or bring the Eastern Roman Empire in decline, or impact upon China in such a way as it can't stay together as one empire after about 200 or 220 CE, or the Hindu or the Kushan dynasty, or the Gupta dynasty that comes after it, right? All of those sorts of things are part and parcel of you trying to figure out either picking one, or if you decide to do the more sophisticated argument, show how all three work in concert with each other and combine and conspire to bring down and bring these empires into decline. In a couple of cases, partial, complete collapse, right? And so you're trying to address all those things along the way. These questions build on each other. These are not questions that you just answer separately. So please do not write a paper that basically takes each question and makes them a subheading, right? You don't write one, which one is more important, decline or collapse, and then pick one, and then explain in the next section why you picked that one. You're doing all of that and addressing this larger question. The first question is the big question. You're just explaining to me. These other questions that come after the first question and the topic question are really just amplifying the original question. So you're explaining in the process of either picking one or putting them together as part of one theme why you're doing it the way you're doing it, right? You're telling me what your two examples are that you're going to use. You do not have to do all five. You can just pick two. You can pick Rome and Persia. You can pick Rome and India. You can pick Persia and China. You can pick, if you really want to, you can pick Hellenistic Greeks and how they got subsumed by the Roman Empire and why their decline enabled the Roman Empire to come in and subsume them around 148 and 146 BCE. You can do that if you really want to be that narrow about it. You have to realize too, when you talk about Persia, that Persia is not just one dynasty. Persia had three dynasties over roughly a 1300-year period. The Achaemenids to the Sassanids. So there are three major and a couple of minor dynasties throughout ancient Persian history that are all imperial, up until the advent of Arab Muslims conquering Persia in 651 CE. So you really want to deal with all of these things sort of in a holistic way, right? And so when it comes to this paper, here are the things I'm expecting for you to do. And I just want to narrow it down in a nutshell. You need to write a really good introduction. That's the bottom line. If you want to do well on this paper, write a good introduction. That means doing what I sort of just did verbally, but on paper, in terms of being able to write a coherent introduction that addresses pretty much every aspect of the topic question. Picking one, explaining in the process why you picked one, or if you're not picking one, but you explain that all of them work in concert, explain why you're doing it that way. You give me your specific examples that you plan on using, whether it's Rome or India and China or Persia and China or what have you, addressing this question. Address the fact that while in one case, where it was a decline or a collapse, and what the differences between the two of them are, all in wrapping up that this is, these are the things that you plan on covering. That's what an introduction's for. Please don't give me throwaway sentences and throwaway paragraphs. Throwaway sentences like, all empires try to expand in this period. Of course, that's why they're empires. Don't state the obvious. Don't give me general things about world history. If I'm asking you for directions from how to get on the Beltway, from Silver Spring. I don't expect you to tell me, the history of how they built Colesville Road and changed its name from Columbia Pike to Colesville Road in the 1960s. Please don't do that, right? That would be boring, and quite frankly, it's completely irrelevant. Same thing goes with topic question. Same thing goes with a topic statement or a thesis statement and the introduction that surrounds it. You really want to be focused in answering the question. If you've got a multi-part question that involves incorporating the other parts of the question into a larger question, then you need to do that. And the writing samples that I provide for you are examples of students who were able to successfully do those things for topic questions and for papers that they wrote independently, right? Independent of me giving them a topic question, that is. So please look at those. I would say in terms of content, you always want to make sure that you address as many aspects of the question as you can. So please do not look at this question and do what you did for week 3. Many of you did this for week 3 discussion, which is I asked for 2 examples from various civilizations, and you gave me examples from all the civilizations, right? You want to pick 2. If you want to do a third one, that's fine, but you only have 5 pages to work with. So if you do more than 2, you're cutting away time, or at least wordage, from being able to dig more deeply into the ins and outs, the rise and fall or decline of 2 civilizations when you do a third one. Definitely do not do all 5. You will not have enough space. It's too big a question to do all 5, right? And in the same time, be able to explain the difference between collapse and decline. Explain how, one or all 3 of these things between barbarian invasion, civil war, and epidemic disease all conspire to bring down or decline, bring into decline a great, classical civilization. So, content-wise, that's the thing I'm looking for is specificity, continuity. Don't jump from one thing to another without transitioning or explaining why this is important. Please don't do the mystery writing thing where I have to guess until the end what your point is. Please let me know what it is up front and keep hammering away at it as you continue to write your paper. Please also don't speak in the cinematographic third person where you say, well, let's see what happens here and we're going to look at this next. This is in high school. You are writing for an argument. You're writing to make a point. And in doing so, you do not have to address me as if I'm in the room watching a film when you're narrating a documentary. You are literally just trying to make the argument, right? Make a case. And in making that case, you're using evidence to do so. You're quoting from sources. You are looking at lecture notes. You might even be quoting from something from the bibliography that you might have watched, right? You might be using evidence from the additional readings I've given you or from the OERs. But whatever it is, make sure that that's the focus, using evidence and not, in other words, you are showing me what your evidence is and not just telling me through irrelevant sort of statements like, we'll look at this next and let's see that and all those sorts of things. It's not very good writing, and more importantly, it doesn't get your point across. And you want to end with a solid conclusion that amplifies what you've said in the previous 4 or 5 pages. All the while citing stuff, right, of course, which I'll explain too. Other basics, put your name at the top of your paper. No cover pages. It says it in the document for your paper, but I'm reiterating this because I consistently have had to take points off. I don't take many points off for this, but please no cover pages. Students often use cover pages as a way to say that they have 1 page done. Say I've fulfilled my 5-page requirement. No. So no cover pages. I just want a heading at the top of your first page, where the name of the class, your name, the date, whatever else it is that you want to put in your heading at the top of the first page, then a space after it, and immediately start your paper. Start your introduction and keep going until you hit page 5 in terms of the specifics that you want to cover and how you want to cover them and whatever your argument happens to be. So please note strange margins, 1-inch margins, left, right, top, and bottom, period. Please please number your pages. You don't have to number your first page, but every page after that should be numbered. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Please double space, not 1.5, not 1.25. And please 12 point. No 11, I prefer, if you're doing 11 point, it should be a large 11-point font, right? Like New Century School Book or something, okay? Things like that. That's it. If you guys have specific questions that aren't so detailed that I'm answering your essay, but they're detailed enough to at least get you past the point of whatever confusion you might be having around this topic, just email me. That would be my preference. Don't do Ask the Professor, because in point of fact, it's kind of hard for me to go back and forth between email and Ask the Professor for everything that you guys might have questions on. For the purposes of the paper assignment, email me directly. That's it. I will get back to you about citations or references in the next few days.